Hey, Molly.
Hi, how are you today?
Good. Welcome to Checkbox Other. I feel
Thank
like
you
I
so much.
I feel like I invited you into my apartment in your whole apartment complex right now. You've already been here, but now you get to kind of be a full-on guest in my living room. So,
What
so
an
excited.
amazing metaphor. I feel like your landlord.
Yes, the best landlord ever, let's be honest.
Well, sometimes it is so nice to be on your show. As you know, I listen to your show all the time, very religious listener, and I'm so happy to be on it. So thank you
Oh,
for inviting me.
of course, I see chills. So, just so listeners know, before we came on, I'm in a tank top right now in Boston in well, it's warm for us right now. It's like 42 degrees outside. Woo, tropical. But I was saying to Molly how I get so excited on these podcasts and I get the heat in my body. You've heard me talk about it before, but when you say things, I in my workshops and stuff, when there's like truth that comes, sometimes I get chills. So I just in my tank top got chills. I'm like, I need a sweater. What's happening? So thank you
I
for that.
remember one time you and I were chatting on the phone, and I remember you said, I got chills when you said that. I'm getting a flashback to you saying that is like a catchphrase for you.
Yes,
Like podcast subtitle, I've got chills.
I've got chills. They're multiplying. I'm sorry, Grease reference, my bad. So we could do this. So you're now getting a view into how our conversations go on the phone. Let's get started. I want everybody to get to know you. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey, wherever you want to start, wherever you want to go. But the whole idea is pivots, aha moments, and what led you to the amazing magnificence that you create every day.
Well, that is so nice. Well, the first thing I want to say about the journey is I am very much still on it. I hope I listen to this podcast in 6 months and feel like that the show is outdated because so much has happened. But right now, I run Messy FM. It's a podcast creation platform. Anyone can come to the site and record, edit, publish their show. We host thousands of podcasts, including this one.
Woo-woo.
And we are really passionate about making it really easy for everyone that has a story and a point of view and an opinion to share, that they can do that in the hottest medium around, which is audio right now.
Yes, I love it. I love it. So we'll go into I have questions about kind of that journey, a little bit about the name of your company and how it all came about. And weirdly, how so much of my education on my entrepreneurial journey, I feel like I awkwardly was probably like in a parallel track and didn't look to my left and you were there. But we'll get there. I want to kind of start with the whole baseline of this podcast is about sharing times in your life where you felt like you didn't belong or you felt other. And what belonging means to you, I guess, kind of goes into that too. So if you got one, two, however many you want to share, and any thoughts you have around feeling other and belonging.
Yes, I wanted to share a story that is from when I was in seventh grade. And in seventh grade, there was an advanced math and a regular math, and you had to test into the advanced math. And I tested into the regular math. I didn't make the cutoff for the advanced math. And my mom felt really strongly that I should be in the advanced math. And she really advocated super hard for me to get into the advanced math. And I switched into the class about 4 days into the school year. I went to a small public high school where everyone knew everyone else's schedule. And it felt like to me, it was a big deal that my schedule changed and I moved up into this one special class. And it was the only advanced class that was offered in the school and in any subject. And that year was really hard for me in math, but I remember being probably the most dedicated I've ever been to anything in my whole life to get good grades in this class. I got a B plus every term. I still remember it. And at the end of the year, I did not test into 8th grade advanced math. So I moved back into regular. I was the only kid that moved back into regular. But I think often that experience of having someone be like, nope, I think you can do it, me working really hard and trying it and getting that B plus, it's not an A, but it's not awful, was really transformational in my life. And jumping forward, I ended up doubling up in math in high school. And then I went on to become a finance major in college. And then I went on to get a master's in business. And I worked at Goldman Sachs, which is an I bank where the majority of the people are not women, at least they weren't when I was going through it. And now I run a tech company, and the majority of people that I guess or it feels like to me, the majority of people that run a tech company are not moms of 2 little kids that are in the software business like I am. And I often think, I mean, I'm an adult now, and I think about 20 years ago in Mrs. Pattengill's class, working so hard on math, and that would be my story about that.
Oh, I love how in so many ways, because it's that kind of visceral. Oh, I felt myself being like a middle school kid or even an elementary school kid, just feeling like every move and motion and grade and friendship had such a huge part of my identity. And then, I mean, get to middle school, hot mess of all the hormones that are going on there, right, during that kind of identity search. And I think there's a piece of this that we've actually touched on in a couple episodes, but is so worth bringing up and is so important as we witness other people going through experiences where they don't feel like they belong. It's just having that voice that says, even though XYZ system says it's not made for you, I believe in you, and how that kind of can help elevate your understanding and belief in yourself, and also the motivation of how you can push forward through hard things. Because if you don't even get the chance to do hard things and people tell you can't do it, then there's such a, especially as a little kid, it's like, okay, cool, I can't do that. Great, I'll just stay here. And talk about my, one of my, where we talked metaphors before we got on here, and obviously the apartment metaphor came, but I always talk about, like, you get this balloon of excitement about things in life, and there are things in life that can just slowly start to deflate your balloon. And somebody telling you you can't do something or you don't belong without ever really giving you the full-on chance to do it, a lot of times it's one of those deflators that you don't see fully because you're feeling the emotion in it. So I loved hearing that. I also love, how that kind of mapped to your journey. I feel like you and I have bonded over our financial foray, and then kind of coming out of that to create spaces and to create a more creative space to talk even about stuff like finance, how that's played out in day to day. And then being a mom, right? So, because I always tell people that I feel like running my business is like, this is my child, and there's all different, and sometimes different parts of my business feel like different children. They have their own identities, they have their own first names. But then to not only have the child of your business, but have 2 amazing, expressive children. I've seen them on social media, that, you want to be fully present in that part of life too. And in the business side of things, in a space where there's not many people that are going through what you're going through.
100%. And I feel like you only need one. I feel like once you have the first experience where you do what people don't expect you to do, then you can do it again and again. So sometimes as a parent, I think about how can I replicate that experience of advanced math and push the kids into doing stuff that honestly, I wouldn't say that my B+ was a huge success, and I got kicked out of the class after a year. But I guarantee nobody that was in that class even remembers it. The teacher probably doesn't even remember it. But I think about it all the time. And you just said something about doing hard things. Look at I have this, right now we're on video, and I'm showing her this little, I don't know what it's like, a little tchotchke that's like,
yeah,
hard things. And I just keep it on my thing, because once you do a hard thing once, you can do it again and again. And once you realize that once you've failed, it's like, whatever, I'll just fail again.
Yes.
Like, we're just trying to get up the mountain, and sometimes it's 4 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yes. And you survived, right? I can survive hard things. And so I can try another hard and maybe a harder thing this time and see how I might have the resilience to get through it.
100%.
One of the things that women's leadership work that I do, one of the things I always talk about is, like, just by being women and the cycles of our life and the cycles of our month and the, all the things that our bodies are just hard programmed to do, we can do hard things. So no matter what you're doing in life, what your bank account says, what your career says, what your relation status is, whether, all these different aspects of how we tend to value ourselves in the society, like, you were made with all these things that go on in your body, the hormonal shifts that happen, to be able to weather the cycles of difficulty and ease and learning that stuff. So I love that. And I want that tray.
I know I was trying to think where I got it right now. I'm like, where did I get this little tray that's on my desk? Anyways, totally agree with all of that. Feel really passionate about being a model in my own small little social media community of someone that is running a venture-backed business. Messy has outside institutional investors, as well as a mom to I have two little boys. They're 2 years old and 8 months old. And I have only ever run the company as someone that is pregnant or breastfeeding or in the phase of super young children. And I am really passionate about talking about that. And I think often that I don't have a ton of social followers, but the ones that I have, I hope I'm putting out content that it's going to find someone, whether it's someone that wants to do what I'm doing or wants to do something totally different, but also feels like they're stepping out some sort of model. Hopefully, I think of all the women I've been inspired by. Hopefully in some way I can be that for someone else.
Definitely. One of the things is I was coming up for, what do I want to, I want to talk to Molly about everything, but let's get a couple topics. And one piece was about the transparency that you bring to social. Both, I think, through your personal social, but I also think there's a bit of that feeling as somebody within the Messy family that there doesn't feel like there's some, okay, I'm going to pull back a little bit and talk about in the financial world. I talk a lot about how that the idea of value and the idea of how much we pay for and how difficult it is for people that don't know. The value comes from that ambiguity and that feeling of like, it's so foreign, it's too scary because I don't know how to do it. And there's a lack of transparency that is just inherent in a lot of how our financial systems work. I think there's a lot of other industries that we could map along the same line there. But that your choice, I think, to be so transparent with us as podcasters and with your followers on Instagram specifically, it's my favorite because I like the visual piece. It's been, I think it is a model, and I think it also brings authentic conversation and communication. So I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of how you think about your messaging. I mean, you can go into the messy messaging or just the Molly messaging, and the transparency that you bring to the party that's kind of open to the public.
Definitely open to the public. Some people that I didn't know were following me have referenced. I went to my high school reunion recently, and some people that I was like, oh, I didn't realize these people followed me on social. What a gift. But I will say that's something that the Molly messaging and the messy messaging, and then also we didn't talk about it, but I also wrote a book 2 years ago that's about networking, and that book messaging, I think about being joyful because I think that there are tons of reasons to get down about anything, but at the end of the day, it is such a gift to be living in a time where I can be a solo women founder of a tech company, and it's not that the road is easy, but it's easier than it's ever been.
Right.
And I'm recording this right now in my office, and I have this sign up in the corner that says, I was lightning before the thunder. And it's a lyric from Imagine Dragons. And I think a lot about the fact that I am doing this for myself because I really enjoy being an entrepreneur, but I'm also doing it so that in 20 years, it's easier for tons of people that I will never meet. And lightning is bold and it's beautiful, and when you see it, you know what it is, but the real power is in the thunder, which comes after the lightning. So I'm just trying to be successful enough to be the lightning for somebody that's going to be eons more successful than I will ever be.
Oh, okay. I love that so much. I could dive into my whole lightning thing. There's a part of this too, that there's so much power in that thought, and there's also pain that comes from it and destruction that can happen at times. And it is this idea, I use a lot of kind of this going through the forest, seeing the forest through the trees or trying to navigate your own path. And there is this difficulty, and there is that stumbling, and there is that failure, and there is sometimes where you hurt yourself in literally walking through a forest. But the fact that that power gets transmitted, and then that power exists and somebody witnesses that is incredible. And whether they actually follow what that was or they figure out their own way to go about it is Oh, I like that so much. I'm like, yeah, that's why I'm an entrepreneur too. I'll just take this clip and whenever anyone asks me, I'm like, this is what Molly said. Listen to her. That's perfect. Oh, so, okay. I'm going to pull back a little bit because I feel like we're kind of dancing on your journey post iBanking to Messy FM. I mean, you can definitely talk a little bit about iBanking if you want to, but how, what was that journey like? The reason I was saying I feel like we're on parallel paths and not looking left or right is my first exposure to like podcasts. There was a couple different things, but one of my favorites was The Failure Factor on Forbes podcast with Megan Bruno.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I loved that. And I was like, wait, so Forbes is Forbes is something that in the business world, in the financial services world, like we were using them as like super credible. We wanted to be at all these different things. And I was like, wait, they're doing podcasts? Wait, hold on. And they're doing podcasts about businesses that fail and a woman leading the conversation with a lot of female founders. And I was like, this is amazing. And we're actually talking about the stumble and not trying to short circuit the stumble, like actually allowing us to sit in it a bit. So I'd love to hear a little bit about Forbes podcast. I know that you have a blog initially too. And just, it sounds like, again, your lightning is coming in all different ways of communicating with people. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of what it was like blogging, what it was like creating Forbes podcasts, like just that content creation piece of it that then led you to this space where you're creating this space for other people to then create more content.
Okay, I'm laughing because that is so accurate, but also like literally 12 years of my life that it's just so funny, that quote about like, you can't see the dots when you're making them, but then looking back, I'll give you the 30 seconds of my career so that things make sense in like the time pattern, but I'm only giving you the highlights. I'm not giving you all the things that just didn't make this narrative that I'm about to tell you. But when I was in college, I started a blog called Smart, Pretty, and Awkward. Gave 3 pieces of advice every post: how to be smarter, how to be prettier, how to be less awkward. I started the blog when I was on this sort of like fancy or special internship at Goldman Sachs as a finance major. Usually what happened is as a senior, you would get this 6-month-long internship. And then at the end of it, Goldman would give you a full-time offer and you would go off and have like a great career at Goldman. When I got the internship, like my dad cried, like my whole family is like, this is amazing. Like in 10 years, going to be running New York. And I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely going to be running New York. Like, look out, people. Like, I love derivatives. I was working on like the FIC team. Anyway, so I get there about 2 months into the internship. The markets collapse. It's September 2008. Lehman Brothers goes under. Like the stock market has like the biggest collapse of all time. Not of all time, but anyways, it was like it was a whole thing.
Yes.
And so it became very clear that I would not be getting an offer from Goldman because they were really pulling back on their analyst class. I heard different rumors ranging from like they weren't having an analyst class. I think in retrospect, they did have an annual class. It was just very small and I wasn't one of the top performers in the class. I had a lot of fun when I worked at Goldman, but I don't think anyone was like, whatever. Anyways, I'm not sure that was the path for me, but I had this blog. So after I graduated, I was still writing the blog and I used writing the blog to get some jobs in online marketing and email and sort of what existed around social at that time. I started at a startup, then I sort of specialized in email for Book of the Month Club. Then I moved over to Hearst where I was running their social properties for some of their entertainment clients. Then I moved to Venmo where I was their head of brand marketing. Along the way, I went back to school at night and got that master's. Then after I was at Venmo for a while, someone from, this is picking up where you were asking that question, Forbes podcast, someone from my mentor actually, who actually I'm talking to in a half an hour, which is
nice.
But Christina was like, hey, I was at a party. Someone from Forbes was asking about if there was anyone that I knew that was savvy about marketing to millennials. I thought of you. Do you want to have a conversation with the Forbes team? And I'm like, yeah, sure. That's great. I always have done like a little bit of consulting on the side. And I thought that would be what I was doing for them. So I had a couple calls with their chief product officer, Louis DeVorkin. And then we met in person for coffee. And in between, at the time, the role was like kind of nebulous. They knew they wanted to do more marketing for millennials, especially millennial women. And since I wrote the blog, while also working in marketing, they thought maybe I would be a good person for this sort of like hybrid role. But while this was happening, one of my very dearest friends, Jocelyn, who I met because of the blog, had started talking to me about podcasts. And Jocelyn was always like, Molly, did you listen to the podcast? Did you listen to the podcast? Have you listened to podcasts yet? Let me show you how to listen to podcasts. I'm like, yeah, no, don't worry. I'm like on the podcast train, but I like really wasn't. It was just in the back of my head. And then I got this idea that Forbes should have a podcast network and they should hire me to run it. And so when I showed up at this coffee meeting with Lewis, that was really supposed to be hashing about this writing role, I instead brought a PowerPoint presentation about why Forbes should have a podcast network. And one of the more awkward moments of my life is at this like casual coffee place. I reached into my laptop, into my backpack, and pulled out my laptop, and then was like sort of like fumbling, setting it up. And Lewis is just staring at me like, what are you doing? And then I'm like, so I wanted to give you a presentation. And I launched into like a 25 slide PowerPoint. And he was like, okay. And then at the end, he just was like, okay, like, let's do it. And I was like,
damn.
oh my God, this is amazing. And so I left Venmo, moved to Forbes to launch Forbes Podcast Network. It's a network of 14 business first podcasts with many women hosts, including Megan, who ran The Failure Factor. It's an awesome show. Megan's a good friend of mine. Now she is. We met because I hired her to be the host of the show, but Megan's awesome. And I was at Forbes for about a year, launching and running Forbes Podcasts. And then Forbes Podcasts partnered with Podcast One, which is a big podcast provider. It was a very exciting moment in the journey of Forbes Podcasts. And I decided to leave Forbes and start working on this idea that I had been working on, or thinking about. I wasn't working on it yet, to do some sort of like WordPress for podcasts. So thinking about how could people that are not companies like Forbes and don't have access to producers and fully built out editing suites and all of these fancy things, how could just regular people jump into podcasting? I kept calling it the WordPress for podcasts. And I really wanted to launch it so that made it easier for more women to get into podcasting. That was very important to me. It really bothered me that all of the top 10 shows were hosted by men. So I called it Messy Bun. And I was talking about the idea that unlike video, where you might have to have a full face of makeup or have to look sort of a certain way to attract an audience, podcasting is about your ideas. People don't necessarily know what you look like. And so I was hoping that with the name Messy Bun, I would attract women to the space that would want to share their ideas without feeling the pressure to look a certain way. After we launched, what I quickly found out was two things. One, most of my users, not most of them, but a lot of them, like 70%, were men. And also that the name Messy Bun did not do well in search because you only got hairstyles. So when I got my first investment round, that was at the time that we did a campaign called Letting Our Hair Down, and we dropped the bun and just became messy, with the idea being that life and stories can be messy, but podcasting doesn't have to be. And we've been Messy FM ever since. And I know that starting a blog changed my whole professional career. And I think that blogs are dead and podcasts are the future. And now I hope that people that are starting podcasts powered by my software or any software are having that same experience of the power of standing in your own voice and sharing that with an audience.
Yeah. And this feeling again, right, of going, I love the Messy Bun. I love it because, it's so funny. I'm trying to go back. I mean, I've shared with you, I chose Messy, and I'm not sure that I've shared this on this podcast before. I know I've shared it on social, but I chose Messy for the reasons that you mentioned, for the reason that it was something that was female founded and was very much into a space that was very accessible and human. And it wasn't like, who's behind the scenes there? What's going on? It was, this is the brand. I understand the brand. I know the person behind the brand. I understand why they're doing this business. And, I've very actively made the choice that as I'm investing in parts of my business, I want to be in spaces with people that are showing up like that. And, the interesting part of this is like the messy bun piece is it's kind of this friction point. I feel like what we have in social media and in content creation. And I know personally, maybe this is where I'm feeling it internally, that I have my own friction point about just create the content. It doesn't need to be perfect. And then the perfectionist, corporate version of myself that polished everything and everything looked perfect. It had all the pixels were everywhere they needed to be. Like everything was print quality, everything was ready. And I thought of, 30 steps down the line in every direction, it was covered. And especially for women, because we are such incredible collaborative thinkers, we can think of so many different pieces of things that are going on. So many of us get stuck in that perfectionism and that polishing of, whether that be our polishing of our aesthetic to show up on screen idea, or, that every word needs to make sure it's exactly right. And podcasting, I know it took me 2 years probably to do this. And the thing that's been so beautiful is being able to just be raw in conversation. And again, there's so many people, I kid you not, I get at least like once a week, someone will ask me about podcasting and talk to me in the same way I was mentioning before, as how finance felt like, it was like the wizard behind the curtain. It was this big deal, but you pulled the curtain back. And I'm always like, no, look behind the curtain. It's not that hard. It's a lot of work, right? Like, not to say that this is the easiest thing I've ever done in the world, but so much of the work that went into starting was so much heavier and more difficult than once I started and was actually able to get the ball rolling. Yeah. And messy itself, I mean, there's a whole, from an accessibility perspective, financially, it's super accessible. From a user perspective, like you click like 3 buttons and you're good. It's just very easy to learn how to do it, no matter what your kind of technological savvy is. And, I think the other piece that I want to add, as, I guess I'm selling messy hard right now, but is the community. I think there's a part of even just the way you set up the site that you can see the other people and what the other people are doing and how active they are, but then also even just offering things behind the scenes to people that are messy podcasters and feeling like we're part of the growth of this company, I think is really important. So I actually had a friend who I'm hoping we'll start a podcast soon. Asked me about messy, not last weekend, but the weekend before. And it was in the midst of so many other things. And I was like, I'm just going to say, do it. Like that's the short version is just start. There's no, you might fail in certain ways, but you're only the whole idea of failing forward. This is something that is so easy to try. In the same way, like we used to take photos on our camera and we had to be so worried that there was like 26 shots in each roll. We have our digital camera now. It's not like I have to be worried about it. You take the shot. If it's not good, you delete it, you keep going. I kind of hope we can get to a spot that we think about content creation in that way. And I'm kind of speaking to myself a little bit too. Take more shots, take more photos, have them be blurry if they're blurry. We're not in a space where everybody needs perfection to receive the message you're putting out or to see the lightning. They can see it through the clouds a bit.
Absolutely love that. And I also think something that is very unique about podcasting, unlike having an Instagram channel or starting a Facebook brand page, is that the number of people listening to your show is private. So nobody knows if you have 2 listeners or if you have 2 million. That number is not publicly available. And I know for myself, look, when I was talking about my Instagram account, one of the first things I said was, well, I know I don't have a big audience. Like we are trained to think about things in terms of numbers because that those numbers are public. And I think podcasting is so great that A, those numbers are private. So if you choose not to share them, no one knows. And B, that it's not always about having the most number of listens. It's not, sometimes I like to say it's not the size of your audience, it's the impact to your audience. And when someone dedicates 45 minutes of their life every single week to hearing you and either your own thoughts or guests that you've invited on or your point of view, they know you in a way that, occasionally liking your tweet on Twitter will never do.
Yeah. And it's so intimate. I think that that's a part of this too, again, when I'm trying to sell podcasts or even just, I've got so many people in my background, like where I came from, that are business people, right? So it's kind of Shark Tank style sometimes when we're having conversations about business, which we haven't even started to talk about VC, but there is this feeling of like, why podcasting? Why are you doing that just for fun? And it's like, well, am I having fun? Yes. It's not just for fun. There is a very strategic part of podcasting. If you're doing work, especially the work that I'm doing and the spaces I want to create are allowing people to go as deep as they can at the moment and revisit, allowing them to get intimate with content that might make them really uncomfortable and not have to be on the spot to perform or be certain right away. Like there is so many, I should say there are so many gems to what podcasting can allow to happen. And you can also repurpose that content in so many ways too. So
Totally.
I love so much that you talk about podcasting as the future.
No, podcasting is the future, but it's also the now. And something I usually say, I'm going to give you 2 points on this. The first I say often, but the second I'm going to say to you, because I feel like you uniquely will get this. You know, podcasting is awesome if you're a small business owner like yourself or like myself, and you want to get to know, like there's somebody you really want to close as a client or you want to get to know them better. Podcasting is still new enough that if you invite them on your show, they're likely to say yes. Where if you ask them to write a 500-word guest post for your blog, they're going to say no.
Yeah.
And podcasting still has that like fun quality of like, oh, I'm going to be on a podcast today. Why don't you listen in? And it's a great way to have an hour-long conversation with someone that you admire and that you can get to know them. And maybe you find some ways to work together. So that is what I usually say is a big selling point of podcasting for people that are entrepreneurs, running a small business, want to do more consulting, want to change careers. But I also think, and I've never totally figured out a way to say this in a soundbite, but I really believe that there are benefits to having a public-facing project where you are sharing your ideas that go beyond anything that could come out of it from financially or career-wise. I just think it's so important to tell yourself that your voice matters and that putting out that content, it's just a validation to yourself, even if there's 2 people listening, that 2 people are listening to what you have to say. How amazing. And I wish I had a better way to say that, but I just feel like that the mental benefits of being a content creator are huge.
Yes. And, you know, I'll add, maybe I'll give you an anecdote to go with that.
Yeah.
So the interesting part of having these conversations and bringing different people on and talking about things that a lot of times are taboo, especially if you're just meeting someone, or if you're not surrounded by people that are different than you are in different identity buckets. I had a listener who is, in the same way that you're like, didn't know you're watching me on Instagram. Great. In the same way that happens on the podcast, that people will talk to me. And I've had a couple people come to me and say, thank you so much for that. It gave me permission to have conversations with people that I normally wouldn't. One particular podcast listener, you'll know who you are, hello, came up to me and said, I went to a conference and I was sitting next to a person that usually I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking to. And because of this podcast and the fact that you're giving exposure to the fact that we're all people at the end of the day, I had a conversation with someone that I never would have had that conversation with. And we got to talk about so many different things, not just that identity difference, but so many different things. Like that's the kind of stuff, again, like chills through my body. But that's the kind of stuff where it's not the Shark Tank answer. I can't put a price point on that level of shift and opening that another human being can do. And that's why I kind of started doing this different intro to the podcast too. That's like, please use this as a starting point for conversation. If you're worried about that, whatever, like use me in this conversation to be that. Even if everybody disagrees and you want to say how wrong I am, go for it. But like use this as your entry point, because so much it just gets stuck in our throat that we don't actually get it out. So using your voice, I don't know how many times that's written on my website, but like I think our world would be a different and better place if we all used our voices, even if it's just going to therapy and using your voice out loud to witness yourself say it. There's so many different pieces of it. Yeah.
I absolutely love that. And it also reminds me something that you do very well, which is you use your voice, but now that you've used your voice, you've built a platform and you use that platform to help other people stand out. And I know that you are very intentional about who you invite onto the show and how you invite people that maybe aren't getting the mainstream media exposure that they need and deserve. And I I just want you to know that as a listener of your show, I see that, and you should feel good about that. And that conversation that listener had that he or she or they wouldn't have had without your show is probably repeated many times over. And that's just one of the times that you know about.
Exactly. Thank
when
you.
When you're lying in bed at night thinking,
right?
as I often do myself, what are we doing over here? I hope you feel good about that.
Yes, it's normally like 3:30 in the morning after I've published my podcast, because I'm like, I get so into it and I'm like, what am I? I mean, I'm glad it's going out. So yeah, no, this is literally why it's all of this. I always think of myself as, there's so many people that use their names out there in the world as their business and as what they're doing. And there tends to be this kind of, historically, there's been a majority of people that speak with the loudest voice that have a bit of narcissism in the dynamic of what they're doing. And it's, again, this is the thing that has kept me quiet for a long time, or those 2 years, was a fear of stepping into that space. And my hope, and I hope, I think most people that do any kind of work that provides a platform for people to exist, is to think of yourself as more of a vessel than than the object. It's that what you're doing is allowing that space to happen. So I do want to make sure we touch on a venture capital stuff real quick, because I think it's, again, one of those things that boogeyman, I talk about the boogeyman effect of a lot of things, that you have a name for it. It's scary. It's behind the door. It's going to come and get you. Or if you open the door, you're not going to be able to handle it. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what the VC experience has been like for you? I know you've talked and written about being pregnant and going into VC meetings. One of the things that stood out so significantly for me, I'm a member of the wing, and so maybe that was part of it too, but that Audrey Gelman, the CEO, was on the cover of Inc. I forget what the word was. First, I like quoted it in this, first visibly pregnant, because God forbid, right? You need to see it like that. CEO featured on the cover of a magazine. Can you talk a little bit about how the VC landscape has worked out for you, challenges, things you've noticed that you're just like, huh? But then also, I know I got a wonderful opportunity to speak to a potential investor of yours, of like the things that have popped up as kind of fortunate and happy surprises, and the joy that you talk about there.
Absolutely. Okay. So sometimes I feel like it's always, before I was getting, investor funding, I didn't totally understand the landscape. So if someone is in that same place I was not that long ago, basically what the deal is, there are sort of two kinds of companies you can start. One kind of company you can start mostly with your own money, because you can make revenue from day zero. There's not a ton of startup costs. And usually those types of companies are quote unquote bootstrapped, or they're revenue generating from day one, and they usually are not a fit for investors. The other type of company are companies that have big startup costs, or they want to grow really fast. They need money for marketing that will outpace word of mouth marketing, or they're in an industry with a lot of R&D, like pharmaceuticals. And the reason that you see a lot of tech companies getting investor funding is because it's expensive to build platforms. So Messy falls into the second category, where we bootstrapped the site at the very beginning with my own money to build a very simple beta version of the site. And once we could prove that it was somewhat working, I started talking to investors. And what happens is investors give you X amount of money, and I give them a percentage of my company. So these are numbers I'm just making up, but if someone gave you $100,000, maybe you would give them 5% of your company. And right now that would value the company at X amount, but hopefully in 5 years, or when you went public, or when you were bought, at 5% would be worth much more than 100,000, and they would make money off of that. So since my company is investor backed, it means that we have about a dozen or so investors, a mix of well-known individuals and some not well-known individuals. There are people that are investors in Messy that are not public about it. So I just don't talk about them. Sometimes people don't like to be public that they're investors, or for whatever reason. So anyways, investors of mine that are public about investing in Messy would be Randy Zuckerberg, was our very first investor. She's been a huge help for me, both from a strategic point of view and from being very open about giving me some feedback on the site and the product. And like you, she uses Messy to run her podcast. So Randy was my first investor. And then I got a few other individuals to come in. Then I started to look for more money, and that usually means going to institutional investors, so companies that invest in startups like mine. And then from there, Techstars invested in Messy, Comcast Ventures invested in Messy, and those are sort of like the better known institution. I shouldn't say better known. Those are some of the institutions we're proud to have as investors in Messy. And my job now is that, since other people have given me capital to grow Messy, is to make Messy big enough that those people will see a return on their capital. And capital is basically just a fancy word for money. So the question that you asked about raising money while pregnant, in order to get, a dozen or so investors, you have to have a lot of meetings. And those meetings are sometimes over like a Zoom or a video conference, but oftentimes they're face to face. And for me, this wouldn't be true for everyone, I don't think, but it was a challenge for me. It was really hard for me to be meeting lots of potential investors, many who are men, many who are older men than me, while feeling like I didn't necessarily look my best. And it was hard for me to go into meetings in maternity clothes that maybe fit well, but maybe they didn't, and at a weight that I didn't feel super comfortable with, either mentally or physically. It's hard on your body to be pregnant. Mm-hmm. And that's not a reason not to raise venture capital. It's not a reason not to get pregnant, but it is just a reality, and that's totally fine. And one of the reasons, to take us back to what you said, how amazing it was to see the Wing founder on the cover of Inc. looking visibly pregnant, mm-hmm. was that it just helps to normalize it. And if I'm the first pregnant entrepreneur that an investor sees, that isn't great odds for me. But if I'm the 10th pregnant entrepreneur that an investor sees, it's more normal, and it's already hard to get money from people. You don't want to give someone reasons to say no.
Right.
And that's just the lightning before the thunder. I hope in 10 years, nobody bats an eye. The same way that if you, and this isn't always true, but if you went into like an office and you saw someone pregnant, like a pregnant accountant, you probably wouldn't do a double take. But for some reason, it's still harder, I think, to ask for money when you're pregnant.
Yeah. No, and I think it's so funny because I was having completely different lane here, but I was having a conversation about bear with me for a minute. You're gonna be like, how'd you get here? About raising your child gender neutral. So it was a conversation. It was a Christmas conversation, really light dinner table talk. But one of the things that came out of it was this idea that that's such a new idea of something we talk about on a large scale. And what I was trying to get to a conversation of, even just discourse, I don't want you to agree with me, whatever, but can we address this idea of something that's so crazy and different in the same way we would address like women working, right? So it was funny because my grandmother was to my right, and I didn't think she was even part of the conversation. And I'd said, the way that we're talking about this is weird and different. And I shouldn't say we, the way that the conversation is, one part of this could be weird and different, just like a pregnant investor is weird and different. You can't see my face, everyone listening, hopefully you can hear my tone, is like, what? Is the same feeling of seeing a woman in the workplace when women weren't in the workplace. And it's something now that if you walked in, you wouldn't be like, oh my goodness, you have a woman that works here? Yeah, we should have more women in the C-suite. We should have more women in equal positions, right? And positions of leadership. But even just the idea of a woman working was a big deal at some point in time. And it's crazy because I always go to like Mad Men in my brain with that stuff. There were women, but there was this whole different vibe. To think that we're just now in a space where a woman can show up to say, my business idea is viable and I'd love for you to be a part of this, thinking that's weird and different, is just a bit mind-blowing, but also it's real. It's the reality of what we're working with when you see the numbers of women and people of color getting funding, aside from there being some part of them that a man, and a lot of times it's men in the room that you're pitching to. Seeing a pregnant woman, that guy, assuming that he is biologically has male characteristics, will likely not be pregnant in his lifetime. So it's very difficult to understand what's going on. And again, boogeyman in the closet idea too. That must be a really scary thing that takes so much focus away from your ability to do your business. So sorry. And to normalize the fact that, yes, I'm pregnant and I can, not, but because I'm pregnant, I can't focus on these things. It's an exposure thing. It's a normalization by proximity, by literally you sitting here being like, I've never been running this business without some stage of my motherhood journey being part of this. Yeah. And look at this business. It's creating so much wonderful stuff for so many people. So I know I took you far away, but I hope I brought you back.
No, I love it. And those women whose names we might know, but we probably will never know, that went to work in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and did all of those things so we can do this now. They were our thunder, and the life that I'm living now would be unimaginable to them. And what I feel a mix of being so grateful and also so hopeful that it's only getting better.
Yeah, I like this. And, I think there's a part of this. There's so many other things I want to talk about with you. Maybe you'll just have to come back. There is a part of this, though. I think it is the willingness to be, Elaine Welteroth's book, she talks about the first only indifferent, I think. So FOD, being the first that you're seeing doing something and willing to kind of stick your neck out there, how much of a ripple effect that can have. We've seen that. I mean, personally for me, I'm a big soccer person, grew up playing soccer. You've seen that with the women's national team over the decades. And even now that the women's national team is not just advocating for women soccer players, but advocating for women worldwide and all people worldwide for having equitable pay and equitable opportunity. Like that's something that you can kind of see the ripple effect over the decades.
I mean, I can't even run a mile and I know nothing about sports, but I feel like I've benefited from watching that women's soccer team situation unfold. And I think of it often, and you just never know the ripples that you will have. And social media, listen, for all the problems with social media, it really can emphasize those stories that I probably wouldn't have come across otherwise.
It allows you to have conversation with people about that too, without the risk of being in person. You actually have the ability to digest.
It totally. And it lets you follow people that maybe you wouldn't come across in your daily life and see glimpses of other people whose stories are so different than mine, but I can follow them and learn about them. And if, like your listener that sat next to someone and was able to have a conversation with them, I like to think that in some ways I'm that listener too, and making changes I wouldn't have made otherwise, picking up books I wouldn't have read, listening to podcasts I wouldn't have come across because of the power of hearing other people's stories. Doesn't it all come back to that? Other people's stories. You can tell me a million facts. I remember none of them. You tell me 10 people to follow on Instagram that will open up my worldview. My worldview will change.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, well, first of all, I want to make sure I'm going to have this in the show notes, but if all of you are listening to this and like thinking the way that I think every time I talk to Molly, that she's got like incredible insights to share and so much magic out there. We referenced her book. It's called Reach Out. I will have this in show notes. I will have a link to directly go and get your own version. But that's, I feel like hitting on so many things we've just talked about amplifying your network and really being open to what might come, that you're not completely, it's not in your 5-year plan necessarily. So,
oh my God, 5 years ago, I didn't know what a podcast was. Like literally, I'm not even kidding.
Yeah.
Who knows what I'll be doing 5 years from now? Isn't that just the most wonderful, exciting thing you've ever heard?
Yes.
And then I also wanted to say, if any of your listeners, Checkbox other listeners are listening and want to start a podcast, the base level of Messy is 100% free. But if you want to do a paid plan, if you use the promo code Molly's Friend, we're all friends here, you get 25% off any paid package. We also have a really active customer support team. They're 24/7. We work really hard to make sure all of the inquiries get answered within 6 hours. You can always email help@messy.fm if you have questions. We have tons of free resources on the site. My personal email, which I'm just because I love getting used to people, is molly@messy.fm if you have a question or something to chat about. but I know if you're listening to this podcast that you are already someone that knows the value of stories, because Checkbox Other is about other people's stories. And I hope that you feel inspired to start your own. Maybe that's a podcast. Maybe that's just being more vocal around the kitchen table tonight with the
Yes.
people that you love.
Yes. 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 And if you're listening to
Your
this and you're
story
feeling that,
matters.
yes.
Yeah.
And honestly, email Molly, email me. Let us know how this stuff helps and happens, because it can change the world. Your experience, your conference story, your whatever can help us ensure that we're putting out what we're putting out and we're creating this. So please, this is intended to be a conversation, even though we're just in your ears right now. And thank you for that. We do want you to be part of that too. Yeah. Become a messy podcaster with me. Join my family too. All right. Well, Molly, thank you. I hope we do this again.
Oh man, I just love you so much. Thanks for letting me be a part of your show. And we talk all the time, but I'm sure I will talk to you so soon.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Nikki.
Bye.